Thank you. Everybody can hear? Great. So, as the slide says, I'm Aaron. All day, every day. Hi, everybody. How's day 2 treating you? Good. So, I came here to talk to everybody about, hey, you want to host an event during a global pandemic? Because I figure it's topical. So, we're going to be talking about a few things here. It's not just about the tech. It is about the people. It is about the process, and you have to mix it with the tech. If you try and host an event during a pandemic where you've got everybody remote and you don't think about all these things, you will end up having a failure, and you might get this. Here's our pandemic. Here's where we are. So what do we do about this? We ask Clippy for help. And Clippy is saying, hey, I see you're trying to hold an event. What can I do to help you? First, let's cover the people. When you talk about holding an event, you really should start with what are the roles? What are the people? Because they are who make this thing happen. You've got a mix of your producer/organizer. So this is a person like Pat in the back here who might schedule a meeting for you. They might be involved in switching videos, managing content, because the presenter really doesn't want to do that, right? They can't manage this tech while they're doing it. So even if you're hosting a remote event, think about this role. You're going to need somebody there to help your presenters, right? They may even have some tech needs. Things like, I know I put a bunch of like random letters up here, but these are the techs involved in video production. If you come from the video production world, you might understand some of these. SDI, RTMP, SRT, things of that nature, right? So depending on your event, these are the things they're going to be involved in. And then duties. So as I say, when you're putting this out, you have to think about who is going to be creating the schedule, setting up your meetings, who is going to be pushing and pulling your video feeds. When do they have to stop? How much coordination do you need? Do you need to have, chat set up so all the producers in all the sessions have a way to communicate with each other? Do you have a mix of hybrid and remote? Do you have all these things? Do you have somebody to... All these questions start popping up for you, and it really comes down to people, okay? Then you have your presenter. I'm just the talent, baby. I'm just here to be pretty, right? You give me something to say, I'll stand on the stage and I'll say it. But really, when you think about this, if you try and overload those presenters with all the tech to manage it, it's going to fail because you need them to be in the mindset of delivering compelling content to their users. Don't give them another job, right? Whatever that is, you need that person who's there. They shouldn't be managing their Q&A. They shouldn't be doing all those things. You need another person for that. That's where we get into this moderator. I've got a star there next to co-organizer, because that's a feature we're bringing. 2 teams, co-organizer role. So it's this idea of you as the person who organized the meeting can delegate out to a second person or third person the ability to have all those presenter rights and organizer rights in that meeting. Manage breakout rooms, manage some of the other things that normally only the organizer can, right? So in some of these cases, that moderator person might get that co-organizer role, right? Monitor the chat, keep people entertained. Depending on the tech, depending on what you're doing, you may need to even have that moderator doing things like doing video checks of the attendees. Because when I'm talking about an event, it's the broad description of everything under the sun. It is not just putting on this conference. It could be you simply need to hold a town hall, but everybody can't come in, or some people can't come in. It could be you want to, let's say you're the NBA and you want to have a bunch of people watching your people play basketball games, but they can't be there, right? That's what I mean. You have to really stop the idea of an event is a single occurrence of something and broaden your scope of when I'm talking about you want to host an event, it's any and everything from a meeting to a webinar to a town hall to a full-scale conference to your students' class, right? Because wouldn't the teachers have been able to have a better experience teaching their students if they had a moderator in there helping them to monitor the chat, right? Because they all got into this experience where now they're sitting there and they have to tell your kids, stay on video, stop using the chat to harass Bobby, right? So, moderator, co-organizer. Process. This is an often sort of overlooked piece of this because there's a lot to understanding the process and the flow. If you ask these guys about setting this thing up, there's a ton of prep work to be able to host this thing in person. Why would you think that just because you're hosting it virtually, all that process can get thrown out the window, right? It can't. You still have to bring all those pieces to bear, all those process. And by all means, yes, if you have questions, raise your hand. I will try and answer them, except if it's Doug asking me about features for DoD. So, these are some planning decisions. We're just thinking about the event right now, right? These are the questions you need to start asking yourself about what you're trying to do. Is it a native Teams webinar? How do people register? Are you setting up full conference registration? Do you need a portal where people can go and put events into backpacks and create their schedule and manage their schedule and see links and get all the links to these things? Oh boy, hybrid. If you're doing something large scale and you want to host it hybrid, go read Mark Vail's blog about his experience doing that for Commsverse and all the extra work that that takes to go from just an on-prem or an in-person experience into that hybrid. It's in fact simpler to take it all online than it is to try and run hybrid, right? What do your attendees who are coming to this event need to know before they get here? Is it simply here's a link, join it? Or is there more they need to know? Do they have to sign a release because you're taking their video and you're going to put it online and you might make money off of it, right? What do you have the content right to display to whoever's coming into this, the media you want to show them, right? So if you're doing this and you're a broadcaster, how do you get the broadcast rights to be able to put that TV show in that meeting? As we heard in a session yesterday from Crestron, there's a bunch of stuff that, you know, the HD copy protection or streaming protection, HDCP stuff, won't let you play a Blu-ray into a Teams meeting, just natively. So what are you going to do? How are you going to do this? What's the experience you need to present to your end users, and what do they need to know? Because it's very possible that this will involve you having to create a bunch of content to tell them something. This is a little snippet, and I've got a link in the deck to our virtual event playbook for Teams. And this is a little snippet in that covers some of these named, if you will, more advanced scenarios in this idea. So this gives you a little sort of brain teaser for you about what are the types of events when we say event that we're talking about here. right? Because these were things that people used to do, some of them in person, some of them are new because we went hybrid. They weren't things that used to happen in person, but they are whole cloth new. Okay? So it's everything from just virtual conferences to webinars and town halls to truly public broadcasts. And what does that mean for the attendees? Are you working with a state and local government who has to have input during a broadcast meeting and a session? How do you manage that? What are the pieces you need to bring to bear to make that an experience those people can consume? Multi-guest panels. How are you going to bring 3 presenters, 5 presenters, 7 presenters to host a fireside chat where there's no fire and they're all remote into the same experience and give your end users who are consuming that the thing that they want? Right? Now we get, those are just your planning things. Now you've decided you actually want to do this thing. So before your event, you have to answer all these questions. You have to start figuring out, how are people actually going to register? Are you going to go buy something? Are you going to build something? Are you going to use something native? Are you going to use something built in? How are you going to manage those meetings? Right? Teams has inherited from our Active Directory roots a thing called identity, right? It creates problems when people want to join meetings in other places, as Doug knows, right? So how are you going to manage that when we talk about this event? If it's just inside your company, doesn't much matter. You can use forums, you can send them the invite, you can manage it through the policies and the settings. Once you start talking about things like Ignite or 200,000 person conferences or CES, right? This becomes a different scale of discussion. And you really do need to think about, how are you going to manage this? Because the other thing, hey, how do they register? And those lobby controls? Did your virtual people pay money? How are you going to make sure that only the virtual people who paid money can see your content? Where are you going to put it? Are you going to have DVR and have replay? Or is the replay a benefit you give to everybody because some people paid? Who actually sends people an invite, or do they not get one? Right? What happens if they share that invite? Because we all know Teams doesn't have one-time invites, right? So it's a URL that a person gets. What happens if they share it? What impact does that have to your experience? You have to think about these things, right? Because that moderator that we talked about in the people world, if you've turned on lobby, that moderator is going to be the one managing that lobby and ensuring that only the people who were registered get into this experience. Again, if you need them on camera and you're capturing this for some other use case, do you have restrictions on what they wear? Do you have to do camera checks? Do you have to run green rooms? Do you have to have these things in your process before you bring the people into the meetings? Hey, look, we're hosting one of these things that is an event now, right? So it's during the event, meaning it's going to be going on, but it's before your attendees join. Who's going to start that meeting? What restrictions do they have? What settings do they need to do once they come into the meeting? What can you set up ahead of time? Do they need to be managing roles within that meeting to promote the presenter once they come in? What are the things you need to make sure they know of when they get into this? When attendees join, what should they be seeing? Like in this room, before I walked in, there was a slideshow going, just displaying a movie of some content. Should that be what your attendees see? Should they see the screen? You know, a movie screen, you know, the little curtains in front of your movie screen telling them, show's gonna start in 10 minutes, please wait. How are you gonna handle chat? Is it an interactive chat experience? Or is nobody gonna use it? Do you have to turn it off? Do you need to use question and answer formats? Do you wanna have polls in your interactions? How are you gonna manage those? What are the types of interactions you're gonna have for those end users, and what expectations should you give them? And truly, in some of these, why is that attendee gonna stay and watch the thing, right? You've gotten them into the meeting. What's keeping them there? Because we all think that meetings are things you join and you interact with and you have an event, or you have some interaction, you do some work, because we work on teams, right? But when you're talking about these events, why do they want to stay in this lower fidelity than reality experience? What's keeping them there? After the event, it went swimmingly. Everybody's happy. Everything happened. Now what do you do? Is it something where the event really was just a precursor to build a community in your environment, right? Did you host a town hall on Yammer, streaming out something to in fact encourage employee engagement and Q&A on Yammer? Was that really the reason you did this, right? How do you close the meeting? Do you need anything from the attendees afterwards aside from that survey or the response, right? Can they jump in and attend again? How are you going to get that attendance report? All these things, right? Who needs to go, right? If we're hosting this really big scale thing, whose job is it now to go and capture the recording and transcript from all those meetings you organized? Because the presenter's not going to do it. Right? Just being honest, right? I'm just the talent, baby. I'm just up here on stage being pretty. Don't ask me to go do stuff with tech. That's work. I don't do work. I just talk to people. So now we get into the tech. Did you add more time to my session, Pat? Okay, I was like... So when we talk about event production, I don't talk about teams here in the tech space. Meaning, yes, you need to pull teams into this. There's lots of tech outside of this that you can also bring in, depending on the type of event. It could be some SharePoint, it could be some Yammer, it could be some forums, it could be, right? You could have third-party services that you use to register people for all this stuff. But if it's a little thing, it can be a little thing. But when we start talking about production, right? The actual video that people are pulling out, pulling in, streaming, taking the content that was in that little meeting and taking it to somewhere else. These are the pieces that we really talk about. Teams has what we consider 3 solutions for video in and out of a meeting today. They really fall into this set of sort of decisions. It's NDI is a technology that if you are familiar with game streaming, people who stream on Twitch know what NDI is, because it's what they use to interact with their games and screen scrape and pull those games and stream them out to their attendees. But if you're a an existing broadcast house, or you have some broadcast technology in-house and TV production in-house, those people are likely much more familiar with SDI and IP video. It's just what they're used to. So how do you integrate Teams into their workflow without telling them to throw away $1 million of gear? Hardware out. Then you think about a globally dispersed production team who works in a cloud-centric model. When you're building out something like that, that's where our broadcast development kit comes in, our BDK. This is an Azure-based thing that I'll dig into a little. So NDI. Here's some little, I don't want to say gotchas, but things that you should know when you're talking about NDI and NDI in a Teams sense. It's bandwidth heavy, first and foremost. It can also be processor heavy. When you think about this and you're talking about NDI in a Teams meeting, you want to get the highest quality. NDI wants you to have the highest quality. If you try and pull out 4 unique persons' videos out of a single computer, here's the number for you. You're pulling between 16 and 20 megabit down from that client, and out of that PC's network interface is going to be 400 megabit. When I start talking with customers about doing NDI, I stop talking about single gigabit LAN and we start talking about 10 gigabit LAN. Right? There's a policy for broadcast over NDI in Teams. You have to turn it on in your meeting. Remember, though, in a multi-person meeting, the NDI feed, no matter who you're pulling it from, is the mix of everyone in the meeting, except the producer who's capturing that feed. Everybody in the meeting will hear it, but they won't be pulling that feed out if they're capturing somebody else's video. It's still not recommended to use that audio channel as an active communication method because everybody who's watching the meeting can hear it, right? And then watch Ignite for news. I can't say more. Hardware out is a feature that we just released out of Teams. We have 2 vendors today who are integrated with this. They are devices that plug into a Teams or into a PC or a Mac running Teams that can pull out 1 or more legacy, as I call it, SDI video feeds onto a customer's production network. AHA and Blackmagic, they're DECLink devices. They plug into Teams. Teams recognizes them as hardware out, and you're off to the races. Teams can pull out videos. Bottom note there. Individual isolated video feeds only. It doesn't support any of our bot created or desktop sharing kind of capabilities, right? So this is video. If you're dealing with a customer who's doing SDI and they're dealing with these in a Teams meeting, they're in fact likely going to have the presentation coming from some other PC on their production network feeding into the meeting rather than trying to pull it out via your Teams meeting. Your Teams meeting is really just there for them to get video feeds from remote people. It's not how they're going to be using that technology, right? For them, Teams is in fact a sort of a subset of what they do, right? The overarching piece about this technology piece, when I talk about video production and technology, really is remembering that as soon as it comes out of Teams, it is a video feed that those video people can do whatever they used to do with video feeds, right? So if you had video people in your world who used to have a 16-channel SDI video switcher, and you're now bringing them some feeds from Teams, that's just another feed that has to live in their 16-switcher SDI video switcher where they can do stuff. It doesn't change anything from a Teams perspective. Again, Teams is just bringing video into that plant. And Teams doesn't really care what you do once you've brought it into that. Our broadcast development kit. This is a newer thing that we worked with a partner to build and released on GitHub as a set of examples and services that you can take and deploy into Azure to connect to Teams and pull out videos of attendees either via SRT or RTMP. Okay? It has a number of components to it. It's not the simplest thing to deploy, but the reason we released it this way is, again, for those customers who are in that scenario of having a distributed video production team who works in a cloud-centric model. They already have switchers in the cloud. They already have virtual video switching set up in Azure or AWS somewhere. They already have that work because they already work across region or across geography, right? Those are the customers who will take this and not just be able to deploy it as it is, but extend it. Now you get into your presentation, right? Depending on the type of meeting you had, it was a meeting, it was a webinar, it was a broadcast, it was a live event, it was a sporting event, it was a... The list goes on. What are you actually doing with that? How interactive is it? Who's managing it? Likely it's your producer, but maybe there's somebody else who's feeding them something and you have to work with them, right? Because your producer is really just the person interacting with the Teams component of it. Once you start talking with video feeds from production people, there's a whole source somewhere on the other side of this wall that's called Teams that I don't really know about. But if it starts failing, Teams is going to suffer. Right? For some of these, it may be something where you want to be hosting, you know, you're dealing with the scale of Teams. Teams has a listed scale of we support 300 people in this kind of meeting, 1,000 people in this kind of meeting, 10,000 people in this kind of meeting, and 100,000 people in this kind of meeting. And those all have different levels of interactivity and different levels of capabilities. But depending on your scenario, do you need to go beyond that and effectively have lots of people in lots of unique meetings that are all watching the same content, right? Because you might want the interactivity of a regular meeting and the real-time nature of a regular meeting, but your scale is beyond our 300 number or 1,000 number. So how do you do that? How are you going to feed those videos, that content, that presentation into all those unique meetings? How many people are needed for this? What's the technology you're going to be interacting with? Like this, we've got a camera in the back and I'm lit so that we can record this so that, you know, Pat can go and edit it and stream me on YouTube and make me be a presence liar. But how are you going to do that? In this scenario, for the on-prem place, in person, I can toss this to somebody who wants to ask a question and we can capture their question on the recording, right? Nobody seems to want to ask me any questions, so. But are you going to capture that for the recording and the playback? if somebody wants to go and view this session afterwards and listen to me dance around on stage for a while, what are they going to get out of that? Is there going to be something compelling in that, or is it just going to be a talking head that gives them no value? Right? Because if there was interactivity in that meeting, you need to capture that interactivity to play back to your attendees. And how do you do that? Where are the presenters? What do you need to tell those presenters when they're presenting? Right? Because when we were all home, we all just joined these meetings from wherever we were, and if we had little network glitches, nobody really cared, and we could just dial in and say we're sorry. But when you're hosting a meeting or an event, and you got people coming in from wherever and or maybe paying you for the privilege of coming into this thing, do you need to worry about where your presenters are or what they're connected to? The other reason where your presenters are sort of matters is remember how Teams figures out where to host a meeting. Teams will host a meeting, not where your organizer lives, but closest to the first person who joins the lobby. Not is admitted to the meeting, but joins the lobby. Back in the people and process, remember I said how early are you going to start that meeting so it can be where it's good for you or your presenter to have a great experience. Because if your attendees are streaming some content from you, it can buffer, they can wait, they can get it, it isn't going to really kill them. But if your presenter is literally across the globe from where you're hosting your meeting, as much as Jamie and I like to say that Microsoft Research keeps trying to break the laws of physics, they haven't quite done it yet. There's a speed of light problem that we still haven't figured out how to fix, right? For your in-person attendees, because you've hosted this sort of hybrid meeting, what's going to be the in-person experience if the presenter is remote? Right? What level of interactivity are they going to be able to have with that presenter? How are you going to manage the Q&A for that scenario? This is a public service announcement around our Teams recorder bot. It has some limits and doesn't capture, unless you've really looked at it, a lot of what you think it might in a meeting. For today, as in PowerPoint Live is a great PowerPoint technology that enables all these connectivity things and people can stream. When you record a meeting with PowerPoint Live, they don't get any of that, right? We're working on it, but that's what it is today. So when you're talking about recording this for somebody to play back later, how are you going to record that? Are you going to rely on our Teams recording technology? Are you going to, do you need to tell your presenters, please only use screen share? We know PowerPoint Live is great, but, right? Or is that not really a problem for you because what you intend to do is take that PowerPoint and distribute it to all the attendees and you don't really care if they were able to view it in the video, right? So for your remote attendee, in this hybrid scenario, what do they see? Meaning, do they see me? Have you done work to make them see me embedded in the presentation? Do they get a view of the audience who are in person? How are they able to interact with that presentation, with that presenter, with that audience? Is it just chat? Is it moderated Q&A? Is it some other app you've brought into Teams or into your streaming event experience that enables that connectivity? Depending on the scale of your meeting, is it something where when somebody's remote and comes off mute because you've let them, how are you going to play that audio to the audience in the room? Or to the presenter, or to the producer? Because the way this room was built out, they never planned to pipe Teams meeting remote attendees' audio into this room and not get echo out their ears. When those people are remote, now you start getting into these complex scenarios of, well, what things work in the web client? What browsers do they need? Right? Do you support attendees on your mobile client? Well, maybe. Back to that PowerPoint Live, it's great. PowerPoint Live doesn't show up for remote attendees on the mobile client today. Right? Screen share shows up just fine. Video shows up just fine. PowerPoint Live doesn't show up for them today. What are you going to do about that anonymous/guest user? If you're trying to host this big something, public something in your tenant, does your tenant have guest restrictions or anonymous turned off? If it does, maybe your tenant isn't the right place to host this, right? Depending on your scenario as a customer who's thinking about this, there are lots of reasons why lots of customers have set up dedicated event tenants that aren't their corporate AAD connected environment. But now you start running into that bottom one of tenant restrictions. Lots of customers have deployed proxies and stuff that tell their, and configurations that tell their users, you can only sign into my tenant. Because I don't want you going into somebody else's tenant with credentials in their environment and giving them all my IP. Because I don't trust you, employee. Because that's the reality of it. Some employees shouldn't be trusted, but that's beyond the point. But when you've got that and you're trying to run one of these large-scale public events, it's going to hit your presenters and your attendees just the same. Because if your presenter is from outside your organization and happens to be using a corporate laptop on which Teams was installed that is set up with tenant restrictions, good luck getting them into your meeting. Right? Back to Teams has an identity thing that we've inherited from some people, Active Directory, that we're trying to make better. A lot of these things where I've called out, it's not so great now, it needs to be better, we know, obviously. Since I'm telling you about it, we know these things aren't great and we need to make them better. But you, as the person who's helping to ensure that this event goes off, need to make sure that you've got these things in your mind. Don't just think because I sent somebody a link to the meeting, they'll be able to join. You gotta think about it. Maybe you need to tell your attendees to try and use personal devices or browsers. Is that going to be a compelling experience? Back to what you're driving for them to keep them in this stream, right? I've got time. I knew this session wasn't going to be 55 minutes, so if people have questions, I'm happy to take them. These are some resources, and the bottom link is the link to Mark Vail's blog that he put out on LinkedIn about our hybrid events worth it. I put a link to the broadcast development kit. our virtual event fundamentals and our virtual event playbook in the presentation. So by all means, questions for me? Happy to take them. But remember, it's people, it's process, it's tech, and if you don't bring them all together, your event is going to fall down on its face. Yes, 1 second. You have to catch. Almost.
So you moved to a co-presenter?
Yes, co-organizer.
Co-organizer?
Yes.
When is that happening?
We're working on it. We expect it before the end of the year.
Okay.
Marketing let me say that much.
So end of 2022 or fiscal?
Neither. I think end of this calendar year.
Nice. Okay. I'm very excited about that.
Anybody else? Again, it's only Doug who I won't answer feature questions from.
Can you tell us a little about the NBA and how that was produced and
Most
some
definitely.
of the cool stuff there?
Yeah, most definitely. So for the NBA, when the NBA was hosted in their virtual bubble in Orlando, that virtual bubble consisted of 3 courts on which they could play games. Each of those courts would hold, or overall, they would host between 6 and 8 games in a given day, starting at about 1 in the afternoon and going till midnight. And the NBA ran this entire setup. What they deployed was a set of VM-hosted Teams clients, all logging in with dedicated credentials per client. They had 9 by 27-foot LED panels, 6 along the long wall and 2 on each side, so it's 10 panels. They were able to drive those with video content, and what they did was each of those panels was a dedicated, unique Teams meeting, hosted by either the host team or donated to the Boys and Girls Club or populated by Microsoft or whoever they wanted to get into that meeting. But each of those panels was a unique Teams meeting that they had a moderator, they had people monitoring it, they could interact with those people. They then got all those people to be on video, they cleared them for whatever they were doing, and pulled them into Together Mode, and then pulled that Together Mode feed out via NDI into their broadcast plant and drove it to one of those monitors. Now, that's what all was done physically in Orlando. The NBA is a little complex. When that game was played in Orlando and shot by a TV camera, and they could get those attendees and the play and everything, it was shot by a camera that was physically in Orlando, sent to a broadcast truck, and sent to New Jersey, Secaucus. In Secaucus, the NBA has one of the most state-of-the-art video production centers on the planet. They took the video in, they swapped it around, did what they needed to it, and then sent that into a separate set of Teams machines in Secaucus who were joined to those same Teams meetings hosted in Orlando, where they could show the people who were in that meeting the live game. Sub 2 seconds. It literally sub 2 seconds, meaning you sitting there watching that game on your TV, on your screen, would react within 2 seconds of somebody making a good play or a big play, and that would then be shown on the TV, and it was close enough to real that you could in fact see reactions to plays going on. Right? Chris Paul could see his baby for the first time via a Teams meeting. Yes. You want to?
No, that's great.
No, do you want to hand him the microphone? Thank you.
Did you talk about the bandwidth requirements that was at the production center to enable that transfer time?
So they had dedicated redundant 200 megabit links between Orlando and Secaucus, and had, again, so when we're talking about Teams and pulling a video feed out of Teams, any unique 1080p video feed coming out of Teams will be 4 to 6 megabit coming out of that client. And then once you put it somewhere else, those numbers change. But if they were taking it out of that client, they needed download into Orlando from the internet 40 to 60 megabit just to pull all those 10 video feeds of Together Mode in Orlando.
Do you have any resources or links to, say if a client is looking to do something similar, obviously a standard Ethernet connection into the production computer is not going to cut it.
It can if you're doing gigabit, if you've got gigabit Ethernet, right? Again, when I'm talking about this with customers, if
I'm thinking in terms of like enterprise level events.
No, totally. That's where I get to, if you're dealing with an enterprise who already understands NDI and already understands the video transmission that is NDI, great, use NDI. If you're dealing with an enterprise who has a video production team who currently uses BNC cables and SDI and has those technologies, don't use NDI. Don't try and make those decisions. Get hardware out to plug into their network so that it's just an SDI feed going into their existing SDI plant that they know what to do with. And then you've just got the regular Teams bandwidth considerations from that client, right? And that's 4 megabits is a reasonable number that any client plugged into a wired LAN can pull.
But that doesn't support Together Mode, right?
Correct. Yeah, you'd have to get Together Mode or something like that, you'd have to either use NDI or do screen scraping.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? So, Jabra has kindly let me send 2 people over to get something from Jabra. You'll give them your business card or your name. So, you want one?
Hell yes.
Okay. You want one? Perfect. Follow me. We'll go to the Jabra booth. Thank you for asking questions, and thank you for everybody for your time.